Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Breakfast Club New Jersey. The Breakfast Club New Jersey was founded after 9/11 to help the people that lost their jobs to the tragedy. Over the years, there's been many disruptions, financial, economically, recessions, and now, unfortunately, a pandemic that have greatly affected the workers in our area. So with that, we have kept the group going all this time. So we celebrated our 20th year anniversary last October. The group is run by a Pay It Forward group of volunteers. Each of the volunteers have gone through transition and have belonged to the Breakfast Club for quite some time, and they continue to come each month just to help out those in transition and move it along and help you in any way possible. The Breakfast Club has accumulated many best practices over the year. The big thing that we have is we've embraced social media quite extensively. So we have our website, thebreakfastclubnj.com, that has all of our meeting information on it and different information about the group, recruiters that we've recommended, etc. We have Meetup, which has been a great addition, where we have well over 3,000 of our members on, and Meetup is critical to us in a number of ways. Number one, it goes out to each of the members and alerts them when meetings are. Meetings are always the second Saturday of every month at 8 a.m. So we try and make it as easy as possible to have a standard meeting time. But what importantly it does is it shows you who has signed up to attend the meeting, and then you can communicate with those individuals after the meeting. It'll give you a list of the people that had signed up, and then you can follow up if they've said anything that was of interest during the meeting, or you look at their profiles and see maybe they're at a company that you've targeted and all. We also have a hidden LinkedIn group. Once you join the Breakfast Club, a few days later, you'll get an invite to join the LinkedIn group. Highly recommended. Once you're in the group, you see all the other Breakfast Club members who are on LinkedIn that are in the Breakfast Club group, and then you still have to connect to them one by one, but it is very worthwhile way to grow your network substantially in a very fast manner. All of these social media platforms, the things that it has going for them is that we have an average profile of workers, many of whom have 20 plus years experience. They're in a highly concentrated geography. The biggest single factor that helps you get a job is to get a reference at that targeted company, someone that you could talk to about the culture, understand better how their levels work, their pay structure, intimate details about how the company or the group is run. And, being able to get to somebody on the inside is invaluable to your job search. So with that profile of members and over 3,000 members in a highly concentrated geography, the probability that you could find somebody that either currently works at, used to work at, or knows somebody at one of the companies you're targeting is very high. So definitely suggest that you leverage the social media aspects of the group as much as possible. In addition to that, the Breakfast Club, we're always free. The only time we charge is when we have an in-person meeting, which hopefully once the COVID pandemic comes under better control, we'll be able to reinstitute that. For now, we're on video conference, and we don't charge anything to attend the video conference meetings. So I welcome all of you to go out, prepare an email message, send it out to the group. If you're in transition, take your your elevator pitch, put it into writing, send it out so that you can get help, send out to the group when you're targeting companies, and also when you land, prepare a message and put it out there explaining, what was the missing link for you, what was the aha moment that helped you get that job. It does two things. That may be something that someone else needs in order to help them land, who's a fellow member. And then the other side, it gives hope to those that are still in transition as they see people landing. So very critical that we leverage these communication and social media channels to the greatest extent possible while we're in transition. On that point, I will pass it over to Brian Mecca when I'm done. As many of you may have known, the Breakfast Club started out as a Yahoo group, which was set up by one of our members, Ken Morris, and it served us well for many years. Unfortunately, with Google taking over Yahoo, they decided to do away with Yahoo groups. So Brian, along with Harish Kaswani, who's our moderator, had explored different options. They found a new option called groups.io, and we've been in a migration to adopt groups.io as our primary email communication vehicle. So Brian will give us a little update on those efforts. And if you haven't already, he'll explain what you can do to sign up. In closing, Happy New Year to everybody. And, best of luck if you're in transition. And I think you'll really enjoy today's presentation. So Brian, take it away.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for that warm introduction, Frank. Appreciate it. So as many of you have known and should have gotten multiple emails, Yahoo Groups was discontinued. We discontinued it on December 6th. Yahoo disbanded or shut down Yahoo Groups on December 15th. So we've moved to groups.io. It's what Yahoo Groups want it to be. It's much more configurable, much more easy to use. It allows you to select daily digest, weekly digest, special emails, however you want to do it. You can set up your profile. I did put the link in the chat. I'll put it in there again. So it's just groups.io/G/thebreakfastclubnj. There's also a link on how to get there in our webpage, www.thebreakfastclubnj.com. So there's also a link in there how to get to it. This is where we are sending out messages. This is where people are trading information, sharing the job leads and looking for help and things like that. So just to give you an idea, we're currently up to 503 members in here, 507, I'm sorry. And for December, we posted 165 topics. And so far in January, we're up to 4 different topics. A lot of recruiters are posting in here. So it's a good place to go out and to get information and to share your information. And if you don't want to get an email every time somebody sends one out, just change it to digest or daily digest. You'll get them as a group like Yahoo used to do years ago. So if anybody has any questions, you can reach out to me. You can reach to me at brianmecca.yahoo.com, or the email address for the owners of the groups.io I just posted also. Anybody have any questions on groups.io or how it works or what it does? It's just like Yahoo Groups, except it works a lot better. Yeah, well, thank you, everybody. George, looking forward to a great presentation and a great show. Tip your waiter, try the veal.
Well, let me introduce George. This is Jerry. Let me introduce George at this point. George Pace is an IT technology leader focusing on how to extract business value from the latest technologies. He is currently working to keep pace with a range of disruptive technologies such as cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and digital assistants to give insights into how technologies will impact the future of work. George is sharing his thoughts and insights on his YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/keeppace. So stop by and subscribe. George holds a bachelor's degree in computer science from Seton Hall University and an MBA from Rutgers Business School. I'd also like to mention a few other things before George gets started. George has been a member and supporter of the Breakfast Club for a long time. And just to give you how much is that this is his 14th time he's been presenting, and 6th year in a row that he's kicked off the year with presentations there. And George himself has gone through a big change in this last year, where he took a voluntary package from Prudential and went and leveraging his technology skills, found a job that he likes better utilizes his skills, and he's much happier with. So my comment would be is that he kept pace with technology, and it really helped him actually land a better job and a better career at this point. And I'd like to just pass it off to George at this point.
Thank you, Jerry. So good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Glad to once again get the privilege of kicking off the year here at the Breakfast Club. Probably a timely topic, as a few people have told me. It's something that, as you hear, I've been working on throughout the course of 2020. And I think, as Frank said earlier, as we start to come back to what will be a new normal, I think or hope that a lot of the information that I'm going to give you today is valuable. Where am I here? Hold on, if I didn't advance, because I'm probably not on. Oh, wait a minute, what happened? Oops. There we go. Okay. So as my tradition continues here, I always kick these kick these presentations off with something from CES, which is the Consumer Electronics Show. Needless to say, that's virtual as well. And here we have Kohler has come out with a $16,000 bathtub with several touchless features for those people that are really trying to embrace touchless technologies. For $16,000, there you go. So one of the things I think we can all agree on is that 2020 was pretty much a disruptive year for everybody. And throughout this presentation, I have a few memes that crossed my my social media feed, shall we say. So I really got a charge out of this one that the occupation burglar was on the unemployment line because everyone is home. And I really got to thinking, boy, how do I kind of change things up a little bit to show the disruption that even I encountered throughout last year. So for those that know me, I do enjoy good humor. And I saw these memes of the Who Had, the Who Had series of memes. Now, for those that don't know, in the bottom, this actually came from a movie called Cabin in the Woods. I did not know this. I always like to know where the meme came from. So these were real things that happened in the news that you just can't make up. So there were murder hornets for May. There was super volcano, which was something over in Yellowstone for June. Zombie cicadas for July. Disease-ridden squirrels for August. 2 simultaneous Gulf hurricanes for September. And then, the last one, which you can't make up, was Japan was going to release radioactive water into the sea. So who had Godzilla for November? Just, you just can't make this stuff up. And, then I said, well, maybe if I don't do humor, maybe I can do a quick survey. And, the easy one, if we were all in the room together, I could say, okay, who put your hand up, who learned a new skill during COVID? And the real question, but was it a useful skill? And what we're going to see today is that time has accelerated in a sense, and you really need to have a very laser focused on what these skills are that you need, because you really can't waste time on skills that aren't getting you to where you need to be. But as I like to do, and this isn't even the 800-pound gorilla, this is the 1,800-pound gorilla, and I could almost argue it's the 1,800-ton gorilla in the room. And this was Jerome Powell, from the chairman of the Federal Reserve. This was in November of last year. And this has been a theme that many people have stated, that we're really going to be coming back or entering into a new normal, much more leveraged by technology. Because throughout 2020, there was a lot of technology that was implemented as a workaround to the limitations that COVID put on us as a society. Now, from my perspective, while he said that paragraph, which you can read, I still don't believe that he captured the true extent of the disruption and not only the true extent of the disruption, but what you can do to prepare yourself or better prepare yourself for this disruption. So for those that are new and those that have not seen one of my presentations before, this is going to be a little hard love today. Disruptions are the new normal. And as you're going to see, I've been talking about disruptions for a long time. We are now in a mode where things have accelerated to the point where you need to be thinking about skills, honing skills, acquiring new skills on a regular basis. And I will tell you now, your success is going to be directly correlated to how you embrace that disruption. And if you don't, it's not good news. I'll just say that. So the days of reactive approaches to this about, oh my God, I've been disrupted, what can I do to fix it? You really want to shy away from that. You need to become proactive in terms of your career management. And that's really a primary theme to today's presentation. So for those, again, that haven't seen my work, normally I do a lot of research over the course of a year. And what I do is, as I look at that research, I find things that pique my curiosity, I find to be thematic, and then I start building a presentation that I give in January. Now this year with COVID and the lockdowns that started in that March-April timeframe, I started to share the various links around COVID. So it was kind of a here's what I'm seeing around unemployment and housing and all the things that happened during COVID. And what happened was those early videos or early webinars that I did really got me to the point of saying, this is all about disruption and transformation. So every Sunday morning at 9 a.m., I've been doing this disruptive webinar, as it were. It's 30 minutes, where we talk about what's going on, what's being disrupted, what are companies doing, and giving at least my insights as to what you could do. So in a sense, a large amount of this presentation was rooted from a lot of those conversations and insights that I shared over last year. But as I did this, I guess the theme for this year's presentation came out, and I started asking myself the same question. Wouldn't it be great if we had this map? If someone could just come up to each of us and say, boy, here's what the disruptive roadmap looks like over this period of time, and what could you, and here's some things you need to know about it, that when things would happen. And another theme today is we're going to read past things. So it would be easy to look at this article and say, in 25 years, new cars would be could be unrecognizable thanks to technology. Wow, great! Share it with your friends. Isn't this interesting? But it really starts getting to me, how do we break these things down? How do we look at it to say, well, new battery chemistries, that's new skills, new degrees, new opportunities. What does it mean in terms of jobs that would be disrupted? What does it mean in terms of jobs that would be created? So when you look at these articles, you really need to dissect them rather than read them. Next up, how business strategies would be disrupted. Now, these were various quotes that I saw in terms of that consumer behavior changed seemingly overnight, that the demand for e-commerce and digital is much greater than it was a year ago. That the fact that Forrester, and this quote has been leveraged a couple of different ways, the world has seen more digital transformation in the past months than in the preceding 5 years. And the follow-up is another one that we've seen, a decade of change in 10 months. Realize this, when everybody was home, if you were in a work setting, somebody or a position of power could stand up and say, we see this as risky, or we are not comfortable doing this. COVID pretty much bulldozed those apprehensions, shall we say. And what happened was we were able to do a lot of proof of concept type work in a very short period of time. And in that window, all of a sudden, those objections kind of are in the rear view mirror, and we're now in a new world of, boy, look at what really was possible. This is one of those reasons that skills are becoming, have a shorter shelf life, largely because of this. People are much more, are embracing disruption more than they ever have before. Who would have expected consumer engagement models to change? Healthcare that is now pushing telehealth because of the distancing requirements. retail where you place your order and you go pick it up. And even this was from a research group, the percentage of transactions handled by self-serveless. This gets all into this, the 6 foot of distancing and touchless or contactless technologies. Who would have expected any of this at the beginning of last year? This one's a killer. Now, this one is not real. Let me get a starting point. This is not real. But this is a job requirement that could potentially say the human assistant to artificial intelligence. We are seeking junior and mid-level human applicants to serve as data science assistants to our departmental artificial intelligence in charge of data analytics. Some skills: experience collaborating with computer-based staff, a plus. Must have good human-computer interaction skills and formal training in the ethical treatment of computers. So again, wouldn't it be nice to know this up front? Now, this one is not new. Technologies that drive disruption. We know that there's been automation and artificial intelligence, but here's just another example of how technology is being used to decrease expenses. Again, not a new one, but it's still part of that future. Here's another one that I'm sure you've all experienced in some way, shape, or form with the dreaded toilet paper shortage. But what are the frailties in the supply chain? And people assume that all of these were just worked fine. When it came to toilet paper, the problem was you had a supply chain that was manufacturing toilet paper for companies or business settings, and it was very hard to turn that off to turn it on for consumer toilet paper. So the idea here is that people are now going to be going back and looking at their supply chain to figure out what the heck's going on. Needless to say, and I think we know, there is no such roadmap. This just doesn't exist. So what you need to do more than ever is, how do you take the information, and again, all of that was freely available information, how do you start taking that information in a practical way to start giving you your personal roadmap for how you move forward? Now, for those, again, that don't know me, I wanted to give you a little bit of a background as to why I think I can give you some insights on this. And as Jerry mentioned, I've been giving presentations here at the Breakfast Club for some time. And it's chunked over time. These presentations have evolved. We first went through a social phase when social media was first becoming the thing to do. We then had a series of presentations just around disruption in general, which was the start of this. I went through this futures phase, primarily based on AI, where what's coming, can it impact you, and what can you do to get ready? And now I'm kind of in this whole future of work, where now that you've got all this disruption as the norm, how is it being leveraged? And on the right-hand side, these were just themes that I pulled out around understanding disruptive technologies. How do you get those skills? How do you differentiate yourself? How do you get ready? And finally, this whole concept of investing 30 minutes a day. So this has been pretty consistent, and it's built up my inventory, as it were, of these presentations. That most of these are up on my YouTube channel, which I'll give you at the end of the presentation. So what you're going to see in this presentation kind of follows this very simple path. The first is the first bullet there. I focus on disruption. I really focus on change. What's going to change? How are you going to be impacted? How do you get ready for it? The second one is, you're going to find a lot of information in this presentation. I love to overwhelm people for two reasons. Number one, I don't know how you learn. I don't know what you need to see. And I want you to realize that this stuff's real. I'm not making this up. If there's a secret sauce to being successful going forward, you need to learn to think differently. If you try to take these disruptions and bastardize them, shoehorn them into an old way of thinking, you are not going to be successful. You need to think about these things and say, what are they enabling? What changes, and how do I embrace this? I'm telling you, that I've said this for 3-4 years now. That's the secret sauce to what's coming. This presentation is actionable. This is not, some theoretical conversation. I'm going to give you specific ideas as to what you can do today to start getting ready. And I still haven't found a good icon for that last one. That is supposed to be differential calculus, with the idea, your real goal to this is not only think differently, but how do you take this information to begin differentiating yourself in terms of your job search or whatever it is that you'd like to do next. Now, today, or for this presentation more than ever before, I really want you to focus on the first two. We are in a new, disrupted, new normal world, whatever you want to call it. And while I'm giving you a lot of information, one of the things you need to start embracing is how do you start getting your sources of data? Because as you're going to see, you need to fill in a few things, and you're going to need to figure out or embrace this amount of change that's out there so that you can leverage it for yourself. So in last year's presentation, where I talked about the future of work, I introduced this particular diagram. And in fairness, the genesis of this idea came from work that NASA did in 2018. So if you did a search of NASA 2018 future of work, you'll find the blog entry that has these 4 circles. However, if you look at the NASA diagram, what you will see is that it's very corporate focused. And it's very generic in nature. What I did was said, well, how does an individual tackle this? And what I did is I borrowed some ideas like individual and business. Well, they didn't even have individual. They had, I forget what they had. But basically, I kind of revamped what they presented. So on this ecosystem, we have the major ecosystems, which are the individual, business, society, and technology. And what happens is each one of those intersections, individual society, and technology, each one of them has an intersection. And the idea is that if all of these were working in harmony, you really get to the center, which becomes this future of work, or we'll call it the new normal. Now, what I did was, as I was looking at this amount of change, the question became, how do I effectively organize this so that it reflects the changes that COVID made? So what happened was all of those 8 intersections, I've been able to hone, shall we say, by taking the COVID disruption and putting a much better description of what that space is. What we're going to do now for really the remainder of the presentation, we're going to look at these ecosystems, the 4. We're going to talk about the intersections of each of them. And then this is where the actionable stuff comes out. What can you do based on each of these, well, 12 in total? The other thing to take away from this is understand this. And I think this is going to become a secret weapon, as it were, for those that are listening in. If you look at this, I now want you to start thinking, and as you listen to the next several slides, look at the disruptions in these ecosystems. So if there was a disruption in the technology ecosystem, as an example, and it was just artificial intelligence, well, the other 3 could kind of morph and change to take that singular disruption and make the appropriate changes. But what you're going to see is that every single one of these sections has had its own disruption. So now it's just not one disruption that you're dealing with, it's an entire framework that in of itself has been disrupted, and we don't necessarily know what that final disruption is going to look like. So if you're finding yourself frustrated, for example, in job search, realize that it's just not you, it's all of these different pieces of frustration or disruption that are kind of working against you. And the goal is to get a handle on those to just better prepare your direction. So let's go through the major ecosystem. So the first is the individual. So I think it's easy enough to say that if I had to summarize the disruptions that we've seen, that this is uncharted territory that happened way too quickly. And most people, I don't know if you were prepared for it or not, but I think it took a lot of people by surprise. First, the magnitude of the impact on the job market, right, was pretty substantial. The speed at which these new skills came out of nowhere was, again, pretty substantial. Now, In a normal networking scenario, and you can think of that as conferences and networking, it was pretty easy to talk to people, find opportunities, and have conversations. But once this went virtual, once this went to these meetups and different conferences online, it became a lot harder to network. And with just the early impact of COVID, where people had so much uncertainty and they needed to align their costs to revenues, this became a difficult space. We're going to talk about that in future slides. And then for those people that really weren't prepared financially or weren't thinking about what happens if there's a financial impact, this is yet another disruption. And oh, by the way, we probably haven't seen the full impact of financing and housing, because if you follow this stuff like I do, this was the whole there was a moratorium on evictions and the like, and we may start seeing more of those in the first quarter. So needless to say, that's a lot of disruption just in one ecosystem in of itself. Now, when I said I'm going to make this actionable, what's going to happen is that each of these, I see a question from Paul. Paul, we're going to get to the geographical boundaries piece in a bit. One of the things that I'm going to talk about on each one of these ecosystems is we're going to break this down into two spaces. What I think are time-critical roadmap activities, and then short to mid-term roadmap considerations. You'll notice there's no long-term anything anymore. I think that you want to take a lot of the ideas behind Agile and compress them down into your own personal sprints. I don't think you have this time to do 2, 3, 4-year planning, which we're going to see in later slides. Rather, what can you do in shorter chunks of time? So in this particular one, this is about you. This is about us. And I would suggest make sure that you're focusing on your emotional health. Make sure that you're starting to get your heads wrapped around financial stability and wellness, because we could have another disruption again. And the question becomes, what can you do to begin preparing for that next disruption based on what you just experienced? And from a short to mid-term roadmap consideration, we're going to have this theme through a number of these ecosystems. Are you ready to do something else? And are you ready to do it somewhere else? Now, again, I'm going up, and I'm a sharing kind of guy. I'm going through similar questions myself. Where would I want to reside? Well, I'm always going to do this, right? I'm an IT guy, so fortunately, this is my passion. But for me, the question of, do I move to a different locale that's potentially cheaper, is a conversation I never had with myself until recently. So this is, I'm not telling you to do something that I'm not doing myself. Next comes up to business. Now, realize we just talked about individual disruptions. Now let's take it to the business side. So the first thing is that most business models have been disrupted, right? Even if we just take retail in general, that said, okay, here's my expenses, here's how much revenue I expect to bring in, and you manage that accordingly. Well, now all of a sudden, COVID with the lockdown basically forced people to stay at home. Potentially, they did the Amazon route. So now you have to say to yourself, how do I manage my company so that my debt loads or my my normal expenses are now aligned with my revenue? And oh, by the way, I don't know how long this is going to last. So the first problem is, what does a new business model look like? That's A. And then B, when we talk about technology and skills, this is where a lot of automation and self-services come in. That's going to have a downstream impact on jobs. Then basic assumptions about business have been disrupted. We've had this traditional personalized service that, as we're seeing, is either going the digital e-commerce route or the self-service route. And then finally, this whole work from home, be it the office or work from home, there's now a muscle memory that's been built out over whatever it's been, 9, 10 months, that how do you undo that where all of a sudden, hey, I don't need to pay for all this real estate. Maybe this does work for me. So again, this is another challenge to the ecosystem. And then finally, as we've seen, just digital transformations are increasing everywhere. There was a link here from SDC exec where 90% of large enterprises are maintaining or increasing digital transformation budgets amid this. So again, Notice how if you didn't have those skills or you weren't thinking about what does a disruption mean, it becomes harder to catch up, basically. Now, I'm sorry that this one's a little hard to see. This came from LinkedIn News on the Pulse. It has 16 different titles that organizations are now embracing, and this was as of 2020. They weren't all necessarily technology-based. What I wanted you to take away from this is, as you look at these 16, first realize that companies think that these disciplines, as it were, are important going forward. And what you might want to do is, as you're looking at these opportunities, or these titles, as it were, think about the skills underneath those and how you can take where you're at and what you need to do to get there. So this is one of those other things that's changing as part of that business model. Now, what do I think you do here? I just said the first one, right? You want to start looking at these new positions. And again, you're going to find them from a number of sources. But when you see these positions, start saying to yourself, okay, here's my list of skills. How does it align to these new titles? And what can I do to better market myself in that particular space? Another thing to do is really start tracking work from home policies, because every company that I've seen is in a different state of, what's the word I want to use? They're just in a different state of thinking as to what to do. Most of the large tech companies have said you can work from home forever. There's still other companies that are saying, no, we want to bring people back to the office as soon as possible. That potentially plays into, if you're looking for a job, do you want to work from home or not? I think this becomes another one, you'll see it on a later slide, one of these perks. Here's what I think is really the new piece to this. Now, you should be doing this as part of research on a company anyway, but I think this kind of gets tweaked a little through COVID. And this is, do you really truly understand what's being disrupted within a given company? Do you understand their quote unquote health? Do you understand their competition? Do you understand their digital positioning? So the idea here is, and again, I have links like, IBM was going to lay 10,000 people off. Boeing, because it had, $5 billion in losses, they were going to cut another 11,000 workers. You need to be much more aware of the business, your business's climate and your business's disruption, so that if you do go through the effort of finding a new job, you want to make sure you're going to a company that's aligned, not one that there's a potential surprise waiting. And understand, even within a specific industry, what are the evolving requirements? What are the evolving disruptions? Is there new software that's out there? Is there new skills that are being required? Are there acquisitions that are going on? You really need to bump up your knowledge about the space and the companies that you're going after from a disruption point of view. Now, society. Now, this is going to be a little interesting. The challenge here, and again, I'm not trying to say right or wrong on any of this. I'm talking about this from a disruptive perspective. But, some could argue, was the cure of keeping everybody, home for those 3, 4, or 5 months or whatever period of time you use, was that worse than the disease? Now, the challenge becomes, if we see future health disruptions like this, what is the right approach? And, it gets back to a pay me now, pay me later. Just understand you don't have control over that. That's really the bottom line. So if you don't have control over it, the question becomes, if that disruption happens again, what can I do? Off to the right, this was just the New York City subway usage. And it just showed, here was kind of a pretty predictable usage pattern until, of course, COVID hit and everyone separated, and then it just dropped. Well, if you can't control the drop, what do you need to be thinking about? And then this has been a real tangible impact to government services and revenue, right? So first, you have more people on unemployment than they may have for unemployment insurance. That's one. And then you're going to see, as they come up with these new policies, that these policies are going to have an impact on both business and the economy. And the question becomes, so for example, the real estate woes, right? If companies are now saying, hey, you can work from home and we sell these offices, well, that's going to be a revenue impact. You're going to see this a couple of times. There's estimates that it's taken about a $16 trillion toll. What do? Do you borrow more money, or do you cut programs? So what can you do? So this is probably the hardest one that you can really do anything about. Here's what I would suggest. First, there's one that's called tracktherecovery.org. Very interesting site. I found this back, I think, in the May, June timeframe. It really has multiple tabs, and it's showing you what goes on at a state level. So at least you can get a gauge as to what sections of the country are doing better than others. And it potentially gets back to, do you want to think about moving or not, or at least finding opportunities in those particular states? So that's at least one tool. I would also say to you, be aware of evolving government regulations, and I expect to see a lot, either new or enhancing. And some of this potentially becomes opportunistic, especially on this contactless design and solutions of using more voice or motion. There could be a whole new career that comes out of this specific to COVID-19. And we've seen this before. Government comes out with new regulations. Those regulations create new job opportunities. So again, it's not that it's good, it's not that it's bad. It's just realize that these become disruptors to the system. Now, again, I'm trying to just stay in the middle here on this, but I think you're going to see another interesting challenge in the months and years ahead, where, if you've had a large company in your locale and you've been able to tax them, for a period of time, well, typically governments build, programs and they take that revenue stream and they do things, right? Well, now the challenge is going to be if those companies aren't there anymore, or those assumptions aren't there anymore, what do you do? And I think it's going to start changing the dynamics of questions that people ask to say, well, it's really great you're going to do this, but if you're assuming this revenue stream is there and it could potentially go away, who's left holding the bag? So I think in this societal ecosystem, you're going to see more disruption, largely because governments are going to have to react to this in some way, shape, or form. Do they lay off people, and does that become a net positive or net negative? Again, don't know, but just understand society's not immune to these disruptions. Now, out of all of them that really didn't get impacted all that much is, surprise, technology, largely because technical change is a constant. These were just top ones that happened throughout the year. RPA is a big one. This is just basically automating keystrokes, robotic process automation, just automating keystrokes. An interesting survey was that 53% of young cybersecurity professionals fear replacement by automation, and this was young professionals. We continue to see increased usage of e-commerce, and again, I won't go through all of them, but my goodness, any retail entity did a lot of work in this particular space. Contactless technologies. Now, one of the things I think you're going to see is that people, there will be a group of people who, we'll use the old term muscle memory. They are now demanding, desiring these types of solutions. So what you're going to find is that people that are designing products are probably now going to have a new series of requirements around how do we build these things in such a way that we're keeping people as safe as possible. Again, the beginning of last year, we weren't thinking about this capability. Now it's here front and center. And then, of course, my personal favorite, there are people with nothing else better to do. And we've got this whole cybersecurity thing. And we just saw that recent attack, I think it was in the October-November timeframe, which again, is unsettling. Fortunately, there's a few things that you can do. But just remember, technical change is the constant here. Now, what I would tell you to do in this particular case, and this is an immediate, understand what two-factor authentication is. And again, real quick, basically your user ID and password is one factor. And what you typically have is a device such as your phone. And the idea here is that when you log in somewhere, a challenge code is sent to some other device. And all that's helping you do is make sure that somebody, if they figure out your user ID password, that's great. They're never going to have access to the code. So I would tell you on all of your financial stuff, at least do that, because the last thing you want to do is deal with identity theft and all that aggravation associated with that. One of the challenges is, what do you do about technology? And I'm going to give you 3 ideas. I'm also going to encourage you to watch my webinars on Sunday. I think certifications are going to be more critical than they've been in times past. Now, remember, just because you have a certification doesn't mean, so I just got a response. A downside of 2-factor authentication is, what do you do if your phone's stolen? Well, there are ways, there are other solutions, but I won't cover that for now, but that's a good point. So certifications are a piece of this puzzle. However, if you don't have the practical experience in the place and all you do is have the certification, well, so what, right? You really need to have that married with real life experience. If there was something out there I think you're going to see more of that is applicable, I think, to almost everybody, is this concept of citizen developers. It's really about, you're going to see these things called low-code environments. So if you've ever done an Excel macro, well, in a sense, you did some programming back in the day. But these are, they're becoming much more sophisticated, and they're allowing individuals really without much programming skills to build out some temporary solutions rather than waiting for a more formal development process. So I think if you had something to experiment with or keep on your radar, you'll see this term citizen developer. Nancy just said, like Microsoft Power Apps as an example. Another thing I would tell you, now I've been following AI for a long time. It interests me greatly. This thing called GPT-3, this came out of Elon Musk's OpenAI effort. It's still in beta, I believe. The beta came out, I think, halfway through last year. It's doing amazing stuff, and there will be an entire economy built around this GPT-3. So basically, it's just a much more sophisticated AI engine, and you're going to see numerous products built around it. So if you're interested on the AI stuff, I would suggest go back to my YouTube channel, which I'll give you later, and look at some of the AI classes and education, or at least insights that I've shared. So we just covered 4 beginner sections, right? Each one of them had pretty large disruptions, pretty large dynamics going on in each of them. And now think about it. All 4 of those are interacting with each other. So let's go through each of the 8. So the first is virtual networking and virtual community. So I've scared probably enough of you that I wanted to give you a little bit of a humor here. So the first one was the day 1 of Zoom meetings, and then day 115 of Zoom meetings. And then the quote of 2020, which is, you're on mute. So virtual networking, virtual communities. Video, the ability to do this is becoming more important than ever. Now, there's a couple of things I'm doing here today. First off, you see my green screen behind me. I didn't get many cams because I didn't want to screw up my configuration. I'm in my studio. I've got the appropriate lighting. I understand what it means to look in at the camera. I'm making a very concerted point today to look into that camera. Now, I don't have the energy of the room today. I only have the energy of a camera in front of me, but it gives you a sense as to what these video skills look like, because it's just not a meeting. It's going to be interviewing skills as well. And your ability to be passionate, to emote, is going to be important. So don't just think of these meetings as just oh yeah, it's another video conference. It really is another way of expressing yourself. Another thing I would tell you to do is you need to be thinking about, how do you connect remotely with people? Now, I will share with you this calendar, 2020. A friend of mine I've been meeting with every Sunday now. We have a 1-hour set. We've been talking through numerous ideas. I've learned from him. He's learned from me. And our relationship has really grown over a 9-month period simply by having an hour conversation a week. So I would suggest that, as practice to use these tools, as practice to get much more comfortable in this space, that's something to do. And then finally, conferences, even they went remote. Now, I have not had a chance to go through all the AWS eventing, but AWS's conference, which is reInvent, was completely digital this year. So if you go to the AWS site, not only can you register and it's free to see their old classes, but in January, they're releasing 200 more episodes, videos, whatever it is, sessions. So this idea of all of this information's online, you just have to allocate the time in which to do it. So what do I tell you to do here? First, I would tell you, establish some type of a regular virtual networking schedule. With COVID, they're all over the place. Alex Freund, we can talk about his site in a little bit. But you've got to attend something. I know David Schuckman does great work. Benny Racine does great work. There are conferences that are out there that are going to continue to be online. And at a bare bone minimum, you want to use that to at least learn how to use this platform. I would say to you, figure out a way, even if it's with a friend to start figuring out a virtual catch-up meeting to do on a weekly basis. Figure out what you want that meeting to be, but it really becomes a way for you to get acclimated to this platform. In terms of short to midterm consideration, pick one of these virtual conferences. I would tell you to go back, look at the AWS one. You really want to pick a theme or a skill. You want to look at learning something based off of those and just focus on that. And you're going to see how this plays into the roadmap at the end. But there's this general concept of this becomes part of your 30-minute-a-day mantra. And here's all the resources that you can use to basically fill in those 30 minutes. Now, disrupted skill life and education. Last year, I was telling people you really need to be thinking about 30 minutes. I'm telling you, it's got to be 30 minutes plus, especially if you're behind. You just can't magically catch up on this stuff in short bursts of time. And these skills are no longer nice to have. These are now table stake type skills. Now, one of the things you're going to see, and Google has this Google Career Certificate, colleges are starting to undergo this disruption because now students and parents are finding, well, wait a minute, if my kid can be at home, why am I paying for room and board? Why are they going far away? Are there certain things I can do to augment that education? The flip side is that companies like Google can't wait for skills to be acquired over a 4-year period of time. So you're going to see between Google and these remote universities, the education process is in the early phases of disruption. And the question becomes, how do you take advantage, or what can you begin doing to take advantage of that? Now, fortunately, and again, we talked about this, back 10 years ago, even Coursera, there's certain places to get free credits. You're just not getting the certification. We'll cover that in a little bit. And then the other interesting aspect of this has just been for those that have kids, this whole concept of remote homeschooling. It clearly impacts family life, right? You now have other noise, other distractions that are in the house. And, from things you don't even think about, are snow days now a thing of the past if everybody's remote? It's just another way of looking at, boy, wasn't that a great article to say, or funny, hey, are snow days a thing of the past? Until you start delving into the article to say, wait a minute, what has really changed or what has really been impacted? So what would I tell you to do here? Well, the first, you got to start with 30 minutes. If you're not doing this, you got to start somewhere, even if it's 15 minutes. You need to get this in part of your daily schedule. Another thing that really is becoming critical, I would tell you to inventory your current skill set. So I know in times past, we've talked about at the Breakfast Club, you create your T letter as part of a job application, so that T letter says, here's the skills you asked for, and here's kind of the skills that I have. I'm going to tell you to almost do a pre-T letter. And what you want to do is put down your current skills, and you want to start looking at these new jobs that are coming out to say, wait a minute, where am I lacking? And that gap analysis, as it were, becomes the start of what you should be looking at to get prepared, or at least build out your education roadmap, as it were. Now, once you start getting 15 to 30 minutes a day, I'm telling you, you got to get to more than 30. And I will share this with you because it's worked for me. You really need to think of your skills as a 401k. And if you think about a 401k, right, if you invest when you're young, you get interest on top of interest. And boy, it looks really good when you retire. If you don't start learning or investing until you're 50, right, you have a much shorter period of time for interest to earn interest. What I would tell you, and trust me, I can share a number of things I'm doing right now. Skills that I learned 3 years ago, 2 years ago, last year, have all become the baseline for what I'm doing today. In fact, those skills have become my interest on top of interest that are allowing me to be successful on at least 2 projects that I'm on today, largely because these past 3 years, I've been growing those skill sets. So this is why, even though this can look overwhelming, I'm telling you, you've got to start somewhere. Start with that first skill. I'm going to show you kind of the mapping idea a little later. But you've got to start with that first skill, and you've got to build on these skills. There's no alternative. There really isn't. Now, government intervention and regulation. Realize that, you know, when we talk about all those societal change pieces, there's still a lot of issues that have not yet been resolved. So, for example, what does it mean for remote work and state taxes? You're going to start seeing this because as those governments are saying, wait a minute, we have all these programs and we need to fund them, they're going to go after those revenue sources. So the question becomes, what does that look like? I have no idea, but it's something to watch out for. Another thing I thought was incredibly interesting was this concept of company rights. You know, can your boss fire you if you refuse to take the coronavirus shot? I'm sure that's going to end up in the courts. And again, what does that mean from government regulation? What does that mean on the job market? Building safety. Now, for those that know me, I'm a big hockey fan and I'm an Islander fan. And the Islanders are currently having a new arena built for them, which is the UBS Arena. And they actually had an article in Forbes magazine where they're re-looking. Now, mind you, they did this planning 2-3 years ago on the stadium that they're building. Well, now what they're looking at is with COVID, how do we make the air in that building safer? What are the technologies available? Now, that potentially could become new government regulations when they see the success of that program. But again, something else to think about. And I think you're going to see a lot of contactless technologies, you know, doors that will open, you know, cleanliness. I think you're going to see a lot of that. And, you know, even off to that is restaurant safety, right? How do you make restaurants safer? Because, you know, those are an enclosed area and it's somewhat similar to building safety, but, you know, the dynamics are a little bit different. So expect to see government intervention, regulation, disruption, because it's just the nature of the beast. So what I would tell you to do short term, check with your accountant on these work from home tax impact, because and you know, it might be a topic that we share periodically on the Breakfast Club, simply because I think we're going to see a lot of change in this particular space. What I would tell you to do though is you might want to create some Google alerts as to following what your state is thinking about. And remember, regulation can mean new career opportunities. You know, if they come up with a public safety type positions, or if you're into building management, there's probably new specialties that are going to come out of all of this. And one of the other things I think you're going to see, and I didn't know really where to put this, so I put it in the government regulation section. You're going to see businesses become creative to combat those regulations. So 2 that I saw that were really interesting. In Tellerud, which is a ski resort out in Colorado, I believe, they took the gondola cars, and what they did was they set the gondola car, I guess old gondola cars, where they made them where you could, a dining cabin. So I thought that was a really interesting and you know, kind of neat way of getting around the 6 feet distancing. And then there was a COVID-themed mall store, I think it was in New Jersey, where they were actually selling masks and you know, disinfectants and all of that type of work. So another thing you're going to see come out of this whole space is not only creativity, but I think more entrepreneurship and small companies, which I talk about in another slide. Now, digital transformation, which is the intersection of business and technology, you know, this is just old hat, right? This is not new. It shouldn't be new for anybody. If there was one disruption out of this entire a framework that's pretty constant. It's number 4. What I would say here, and I've already talked about these, I think companies are looking at every technology that's going to help them, get past this moment in time. What I would tell you is if you needed to look at 2 skills immediately, again, this citizen developer low code space becomes one. And what does RPA and automation mean? Simply because can it impact or disrupt what you do? But realize that digital transformation does have its challenges. And I actually covered this on one of my webinars earlier this year, where I started to say, look, there's still a lot of challenges here. Nobody has figured out the secret handshake as to how to make a transformation successful all the time. There's still skilling issues. There's still legacy issues. There's still technology debt issues. And those are challenges. So for companies that are trying to move quickly, there's still a lot of baggage that they have to manage their way through. So, when you're looking at this digital transformation, find the opportunities in this particular space of transformation challenges, and it's going to make you, it's going to give you that differentiation, or should give you the differentiation during the interview process. Hannon, let's say, George, US EOC has already said employer mandated COVID vaccine is lawful. Wow. So there you go, right? Amazing. I'm sorry, where was I here? Okay, so time critical roadmap activities. Again, I don't care so much about the technologies that I talked about here, because we can always talk about this. What I would say to you is you want to get more engaged as to what your company may be doing, or the company that you're applying to. What are their digital disruption efforts? That's number 1. And this is kind of getting back to your skills. How do your skills, are you looking forward? Are you looking backward? Do those skills align with what they're trying to disrupt? So I think this becomes your narrative when you're looking at some of these positions. I also think you need to do this to understand within your own company, are you about to be disrupted? Just putting the blinders on and hoping against hope probably isn't a good strategy. And then the other thing is, are they doing anything creative? I think one of the things, and if you look at these skills of the future, you will see that innovation and creativity are always at the top of that list. Find out what skunk work projects are going on within your company. And again, see if you can get closer to them. Make some networking connections. At least start changing your thinking about why are they looking at these technologies and what they believe the perceived benefits are. And then again, short to midterm, only because these take some time, I would tell you to pick one of these technologies. Again, I keep saying low code and RPA. I don't really care what you pick, cloud, AI, it doesn't really matter. But you want to start building up those skills, and I'll jump ahead quickly, at least a month at a time. And I've got a diagram that shows that. In terms of economic impact, I've seen articles that talk about $16 trillion, and they've had different ways of how they've calculated that. I thought it was interesting. They think it's 4 times the cost of the Great Recession. Interesting. What does post-COVID look like? And these were, are people going to be saving more? If they save more, what's the impact on, companies that sell? We're probably in a low interest rate environment for a long time. What companies does that impact? Because of the supply chain, less globalization, e-commerce, remote work. I mean, we're really looking at all of these different dynamics, which have not yet been figured out. So when we go back to my earlier statements of there's a lot of disruption in the framework, well, those are some of those pieces that have not yet been solved yet. Now, that doesn't mean you give up. What it means is when you're starting to put your value proposition together, you want to try and be at the forefront of that. If you keep talking about what they've did or what they've done or the things that they're trying to move away from, that's not where their interests are. They're trying to take all of this disruption, and you want to map your skills as to where they're trying to go. That's how you're going to differentiate yourself in this post-COVID world. And then, again, jobs. The retail section has just taken a huge beating here, right? I think another thing you're going to see is even within real estate rents as to how retail operates going forward. If they're going to have these significant drops, I think you're going to see retail agreements, leasing agreements that are going to have to change to reflect that. But now, What happens to the landlords? What happens to the taxes? It really is a series of dominoes that I don't think anybody's answered yet. White collar people have not been immune to this. A lot of the RPA has been attacking those jobs, and things that you wouldn't even think of. As we know, nursing home occupancies are down, largely because COVID hit that particular sector. Physical therapists who have very close contact, well, that industry was impacted for a period of time. So as we look at this impact and then how do you come out of it, to me, it's that opportunity to look at, which is going to be key. So, as part of your disruption impact, especially this economic, you really have to reconsider your value proposition and start aligning it to what's going on in that industry. And you really have to be honest with yourself. Are you in an industry that's being disrupted significantly? Don't pretend that you're not, right? If it is, just say, okay, it is. What do I do about it is the correct answer, right? It's not, well, I'm being disrupted and there's nothing I can do about it. I'd also take a look and just say, this is kind of a time when you're looking at these economic disruptions and the business sectors that are being disrupted, really start looking at your career and saying, does it align? Do I have skills that are potentially at risk? Or are these companies potentially at risk? So I think the economic impact, while you can't do anything about that, the economic piece of it, what you can do is say, if these companies are being threatened, what do I do about it? Mid to short term, I think you're going to see a lot of entrepreneurs and startups, maybe this year, starting into next year. So one of the things we always talk about at the Breakfast Club is, don't necessarily look at the large companies, look for those small companies. And I think based on everything we've covered so far, that's a critical piece to it. And then I want to put this up there, on that economic impact, is moving to a cheaper location an option? This is not a yes or no question. There's a lot of planning and decisions that need to go into this. But I think as we talk about the societal implications, the government regulation, the tax, you have to think about that bubble or that basket of issues to really start asking yourself this question, probably on a more frequent basis. Now, in terms of societal transformation, we're starting to see some of this. Some of this was here, some of this is new. Worker relocation, you're seeing it out in San Francisco, you're seeing it in New York, where workers that were in high taxed or very costly cities are, because of remote work, are moving elsewhere. So, again, what does that mean to the economic climate, the tax climate, blah, 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 blah. Following the census insights, so back to track to recover, I think becomes one tool. Now, the census information, while it's going to be a bit dated, is going to start showing you those states that are losing people. And, it doesn't take much to realize if you're starting to lose people, you're losing tax revenue. Well, again, think about that. Payday. Now, this, I actually covered this, I think, last year, but it just came up again, where PayPal has become one of the first major companies to give workers access to their pay as soon as it's earned. That's just a wow, right? We went from, a very different model, and yet even how you get paid potentially gets disrupted. And then, another thought on societal transformation becomes, well, what is a perk that companies can now offer if everybody's working from home? Now, some might say that working from home is the biggest perk of all, but now it's, if companies try to lure you back into the office, what does that really mean? Again, don't have the answer, but it's something to consider. So, things that you can do short term, as part of your research on a company. Are companies, not only individuals, are companies looking to get out of the region that they're in? So it's definitely food for thought, but it gets you back to this whole, it's no longer, I'm going to apply for a job and I hope that company is in this location. It may be, I'm applying to a company that's potentially moving, has remote work. There's new dynamics to think about. And then, if they did offer you perks, what does that mean? And then, short to midterm considerations. This was kind of a hard one to put together. But, again, how is your state, local climate going to be impacted? And I think the last one to really keep an eye out for is this whole potential impact of location-based salaries. Now, this popped up, I think, in the August, September range, if I'm not mistaken, where companies were starting to say, well, wait a minute, if we're paying you to be in San Francisco, but now you're in, I don't know, pick a Montana, I don't know, somewhere that's less than San Francisco, are they going to adjust the salary based on where you live? Just another dynamic to consider. Displaced workers and remote workforce. If you're working from home, and I'll tell you, I've been working from home myself. I'm doing most of this. Well, I'm going to be doing it in 2021. So for those that don't know, Wi-Fi 6 came out last year. Wi-Fi 6E, I'm sorry, Wi-Fi 6 was popular last year. Wi-Fi 6E, which is a bump on 6, is coming out. The products will be coming out in 2021. So you just want to look to make sure that you've got the appropriate bandwidth in terms of the speed to your internet connection and then the speed within your house. A big one for me is your office setting. For me, one of the things that I've been doing is I've got one of these great standing desks. I absolutely love it. I'm waiting for CES to get new monitors. I'm going to be upgrading some computers. So I'm really going to have probably I'm going to have a very dynamic workstation in 2021. Again, you need to be scheduling time for learning and certification. Again, I don't care how you do that, but you need to do it. And then to me, this last one, again, are you ready to relocate tomorrow? There's a lot that goes into this. I mean, I probably could do a half an hour session just on, could you sell your house tomorrow? Do you need to put your house back together? What are the family consider? I mean, it's a long list, but when you think of displaced, this is but one aspect of it, right? And then the second one becomes, if you really haven't invested in your remote work, your remote office to go do that. One of the things that I saw, and you're going to see a variety of these, this just is kind of one of these maps. And again, I don't care how you do it in terms of an XY coordinate, but this particular one came from CIO Dive, where it just showed, segments that they expected to have a lot of impact and then no impact. So it kind of goes back to earlier things I talked about in terms of, is a company being disrupted? Is a space being disrupted? Are skills being disrupted? This is just one way of visualizing this. And you want, obviously, in this particular instance, trend to quadrant 3 versus quadrant 1. And then on the right-hand side, these are the top 10 skills of 2025. This came from the World Economic Forum that I tend to use pretty frequently. And again, analytical thinking, active learning, complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, originality and initiative, leadership and social influence, technology, resilience, reasoning. These are things that really can't be automated. These are things that AI doesn't necessarily do well. And those are some of the skills you want to make sure are on your T-letter, in a sense, to highlight and differentiate yourself. And these, I'm going to be guessing employers are going to be looking for these types of skills. It's one way to, or at least it's a starting point as to what those skills should be. The last one is supply chain disruptions. One of the things that's happened, I don't think many people really thought about this, right? If you do, with all of the muscle memory around, hey, our supply chain has worked for a long period of time, why touch what isn't broken? Well, now all of a sudden, I think people are realizing that this was something that probably was at a higher risk, and now they're seeing, in fact, that it was. So, companies are now looking at how can they change their supply chain to be more flexible. When market demand changes on a dime, keep using toilet paper as the example, how do you quickly change your supply chain to meet that demand? And then there's a whole series of articles that are talking about the cost-benefit analysis of reshoring, and what does that mean in terms of creating a more reliable supply chain? What I would say, and this was like, this particular one from Industry Week started looking at the factors that were changing these financial models. It was cost, level of automation, innovation and intellectual property, product quality and safety, essential business designation, and environment regulation. These are starting to be looked at by companies to figure out which piece of their supply chain goes where. Now, to me, that becomes an opportunity. So if you're in the supply chain, I'd find out how to differentiate myself, again, looking forward, because this is this has to be under active evaluation right now. And then there's new roles emerging. Somebody just came on with if you could mute your mic. I just heard
We'll
somebody.
look at that too.
David, is that you? Okay.
I will look at, somebody has their microphone on, please mute your mic, but I will be looking at it too.
Thank you, David. And then, as you see these new career opportunities, and I talked about this earlier on the CIO piece, there's new roles that are coming out. So director of automation, customer experience experts, data stewards. You really want to look at these companies. I would tell you, don't necessarily look at the jobs that fit for what you do. I would be suggesting look at these jobs that, these new job descriptions that are coming out, because there are going to be changes based on all of this disruption that we've talked about, ranging from what are the new disciplines in the CIO or C-level type jobs that they have, and then what are the jobs that are going to spawn off of that. So again, when we talk about getting ready, what does this new normal look like? These are those pieces of evidence that you're going to need to help you begin formulating your own roadmap. And this actually came out of this reshoring article. This was the diagram that was in there. But what I wanted to leave you guys with was, look, any of these processes, existing processes, can be disrupted. And the idea here is that, they're saying that today, there's low resilience and there's a lot of risk exposure, and that companies are going to start moving out to the right to now build what they're calling a resilient supply chain. So if you're in supply chain, if you're in procurement, if you're into those types of things, I think that you look at this from a futures perspective to say, okay, how do you help them mitigate risk? How do you make them become more resilient? And again, I think this becomes how you differentiate yourself going forward. Remember, I promised at the beginning of this that I was going to give you a lot of information. Well, I gave you a lot of information. And truth be told, for those that are confused, for those that are frustrated, I don't think you're alone. I think companies are asking the same question. I think individuals are asking the same question. How do I take all of that information and do something with it? And as I like to use the old joke, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So what I would suggest, and again, this is just my thoughts. Each one of you will obviously do something different. What I would suggest you do is start chunking down. What do I need to do immediately? Like, what do I need to do in this next 2 to 4 weeks? What should I be thinking about on a weekly basis? What should I think about on a monthly basis? Now, to be honest with you, I think bi-yearly and yearly is way too long at this point. I think you need to maybe use those as checkpoints, but as a high level, what I'm thinking about right now, if you do nothing else, figure out what your disruptor list is. What are your career threats? What are your skill threats? What are your company threats? Be honest with yourself. What are they? I then put down an inventory of your strengths and weaknesses. So immediately you're going to start seeing there's potential overlap between those two. You need these as your baseline, because any other activity that you're going to do is going to require at least that starting amount of information. Then what you do is on a weekly basis, I think, and this is in no particular order, I'm going to show you my webinar link. I cover this every Sunday. We just talk about the various disruptions. We break down some of these articles. I start giving you at least my thoughts as to what caught my attention. If you're not familiar with Google Alerts, it's a very easy way to get that information. But not only do you need to get the information, you need to learn how to decompose these articles. You need to look at it and say, well, wow, that's really interesting, but how is it impacting me? What is it really saying? What's the actionable piece I can pull from this? I don't think enough people do that. Update your social media diary. Now, I've been saying this for a long time. You want to use LinkedIn to really show people how you're progressing in this, what you've learned this week, how it updated a skill, how it differentiated you. Because during an interview, you really want the company interested in you to see that digital footprint. So I'm a big believer in doing this. Now, on a monthly basis, when I talked about the 401k skilling piece, what I'm going to tell you is that if you pick a skill, focus on a skill a month. Now, it could be a new skill, it could be enhancing a skill, but if you think about it, if you do that over the course of the year, by the end of the year, you're going to have acquired at least 12 skills if you pick a skill a month. Now, that might not seem a lot until you get into next year where you find out you're going to start leveraging off those 12. Now, for bi-yearly and yearly, maybe you want to evaluate your physical location, because that probably takes you about 6 months. With what you're learning, update your resume or LinkedIn, okay, fine. And then at least on a yearly basis, talk to somebody about your tax situation, right? Where are you financially? Now, could you compress that into bi-yearly? Yes, but I just wanted to give you an idea of, one possible way of creating a roadmap, or at least how do you take all of that information that you've been distilling or gathering? I've given you the approach as to how to organize it, right? You can start looking at all of these interactions. You can start putting your data into this structure. And then the question comes, how do you take it and start organizing it so it becomes actionable? The last tool I have for you is, I saw this early last year as well, absolutely loved it. The article was, Amazon's at war with everyone. It wasn't so much the diagram, it's what the diagram provides. So in the middle they have, let's just call it company. It doesn't matter that it's Amazon. What they then did was they took all of Amazon's entities. They got Audible and music and all this other stuff, right? Well, what they did was they started to put around it, well, what's their competition look like? Well, now all of a sudden you're starting to see not only the competition, I'd argue you could put another circle around here around the technologies that are disrupting that space. So suddenly what you've done with this wheel is if you put yourself in the center and you started to put your skills around you, now you can ask yourself, well, what are these jobs looking for? What are the skills that I'm missing? So it just becomes a tool to help you not only organize this, but really highlight what it is that you probably should be focusing on. So that's what I had for you guys. For now, assume these disruptions are going to continue, and you can either be scared of them or you can embrace them. And I just, I can't say this enough times. This really is about being proactive, because I think if you're reactive, this is the best advice I can give you to help, because there's a lot of noise in the system. This helps you at least eliminate some of that noise. Finally, for those that don't know, I have the Keep Pace brand. I was born with a last name I could do something with. Every Sunday morning at 9 a.m., if you go to facebook.com/Keep Pace, that's me. We do it from 9 to 9:20, 9:30. And then when I get a chance, I basically take those recordings, because there's just dead space at the beginning and the end, because it's hard to do these webinars exactly. I basically trim the beginning and the end. I put it up on my YouTube channel, which, hey, surprise, is Keep Pace. And there's actually a playlist. I think there's, I think this week is episode 35 or 36. And I think I have either 29 or 30 up on the playlist. It's over 12 hours, believe it or not, of information that when you watch, if you spend the time and watch those past presentations, I really do. A lot of those ideas came into today's presentation. So with that, that's what I had for you guys. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you found this interesting. I see most of you stayed on, so it looks like I kept your attention. So thoughts, questions, comments?
Yep, folks, remember you can use chat to quickly type a question. George and I will both be watching that. And George, not only most of us have been staying on, I've been watching the numbers. It's slowly been going up. So you've
tell them their friends.
Held attention. Yeah, you've held the attention of everyone who's joined on.
And I would tell you, if you go to my, the only ask I have, because I don't ask for much, go to my YouTube channel and subscribe. Pass it on to your friends. At some point, I'm going to have the slides available, yes.
So, David, are we allowed to speak?
Yes.
So, George, it's Hannon. I think of you as, you're like my personal Alvin Toffler.
Very nice.
Really good job.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, and I'm seeing some of the comments, right? This, remember very early in the presentation, I said this is about how do you think differently? This, oh my God, I should put it on my tombstone. This, if there is a secret sauce to this, understanding how you change your thinking is I can't express enough how critical it is, because if you, it's so easy to fall into a comfort zone. It's so easy to let your muscle memory win, and you really have to fight that. So one question I'm seeing, you know, what are the top certifications to get? You know, that's it's like my favorite question. You know, which religion is best? I don't know what you do, and I don't know what space that you're in. So what I would say to you is put at least certifications into, I would say put your certifications into two broad categories. I would say category number one, I'll call generic skills. So for example, if you wanted to learn the cloud, even if you're not an IT professional, I know Amazon and Azure have some, you know, the basics of cloud type certifications that says, you know, hey, you went in here, you learned some basics about the terminology. You know, if nothing else, it's kind of a neat, nice to have. But you really have to look at what you do and what you want to be, and then, you know, then get those certifications for your strengths first, or the place you want to go. So Nancy's got another good question, right? Once you get a certification, what do you start doing? You know, here would be an example. And again, I'm going to pull a little bit from some work I'm doing right now. So let's say that you were learning about, in Amazon, they have a tool, it's called Contact Center. And that's their call center application. What I would say to you is you could build your own call center. And when you start, you know, when you start going to some of these places, you could say, hey, here's what I did with the tool. Not only did I get the certification, I actually put a small app together. You know, even I would take my, you know, if I had to do something creative, I would say, you know, I created a chat bot. So this is, I know this is technical, Nancy, but I would create a chat bot about my resume. You know, ask about me as an example. So I think there's things that you can do that really take these skills and allow you, again, it's back to differentiating yourself, right? So to me, this just gets back to, there's no single arrow that does this. And the trick is, how many of these pieces can you put together to create a value proposition that you're going to tickle their interest? Hang on, Valerie, just scroll back here. Hang on a second. Hold on, I'm seeing two here. I got a question from Ed, and I got a question from Valerie. Hang on a second. So Valerie's question is, how would someone identify their industry disruptors if they aren't sure they can list them all themselves? Boy, Valerie, I want to give you two answers here.
Go ahead, give me two answers. I know there's probably some new people on here.
You know, yeah, the first answer I would give you, Valerie, is kind of jump into the pool. There's probably, man, there's so many different answers I could give you here. You know, one way in some of their quarterly announcements, companies will start announcing, you know, the types of headwinds that they're seeing. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I would be tempted to first start with, you know, who are the competitors to my company? So I work for company XYZ. I would probably start with the competitors list. The next thing I would do is probably look at, I'd actually look at their news feeds just to see what they've been doing lately, and or I'd be looking at their job boards to see what types of jobs that they're offering, and are they starting to offer jobs that are catching my attention. That's probably the slowest way. I think the second fastest, the fastest way is to network, obviously, with someone within that company and just say, look, what the hell's going on? You know, are you guys aware of the disruptions that are out there? So I think the networking way is probably the fastest way, right? Find someone in that company, have an investigative conversation rather than a job-based application, if that makes sense, right? Say, look, I'm just looking at your company. I'm trying to learn more about the space. Can you tell me what the disruptors are? I think the covert ways of doing that are, you know, looking at their quote unquote job boards and the types of jobs that they're looking for, and see if there's a change in the, I'll use a Star Trek analogy. I mean, the Star Wars analogy. See if there's a change in the force. And I kind of go that way. That's where I would start. I mean, then I would evolve to Google alerts. I would be looking for, you know, what are the keys? Like if, you know, it's, you know, medical as an example, you know, what are all the medical disruptors that are going on? You know, blah, 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 blah. I think it's a matter of jumping in the water and figuring out, you know, because the way I find things, Valerie, is different than other people. So, Jeriel, thank you. It's the cloud practitioner certificate. I want to go back to Edward's question here. Edward, for some time I've been hearing about Python, blah, 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 type of skill, loco, blah, 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 blah. Right. So Ed, here's the, yeah. So, right, there's two levels here, right? There's the formal, are you an application developer where you know all of those bits and bytes of not only the language, do you understand programming constructs? Do you understand, you know, what an API is? Do you want, like, blah, 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 right? Yeah, that's a level of technology. And especially if you're not savvy enough, right? That's asking a lot to do, right? Because not only do you have to understand the programming language, you have to understand the, you know, the whole ecosystem as to how to be a developer. These low-code environments are trying to get to this proverbial drag and drop where you don't need that level of knowledge. It helps to understand some basics of programming. It helps to understand, you know, what changes, what a transaction is. You know, I don't think low-code platforms are perfect yet, but being able to understand how these so let me, because like four things want to come out of my mouth. One of the other things to realize is that in technology, commoditization is a real thing. And what happens is what is complicated today becomes commoditized tomorrow. So this general concept of being able to take some IT capabilities and simplifying them or putting a wrapper around them is what you're really seeing with these low-code environments. So yeah, and oh, by the way, Edward, it's just not Python, right? I mean, my God, we could talk about 15 different languages that are supposed to be, you know, popular. If you're not a developer, though, it doesn't, you know, I don't know if I would invest that time. I would think if you're a non-technical person, I would look at some of these low-code platforms. Let me scroll through some of the questions if I see anything here. Any other questions while I'm scrolling?
Yeah, I don't see any others, George, just yet. So did you answer Amit's trying to get into finance banking?
Right there, I see it. Let's see.
George, I'm not sure if somebody mentioned in the chat, but I know you usually plug it, but you talked about the cloud certifications. Amazon reInvent starts this week.
Well, their next 200 sessions start. Reinvent was November, or the end of November, beginning of December. But what they did was it's another 200 that they're releasing in January. So if you go to the Reinvent site, you just register for it. So, Amit,
okay.
So Amit, there's a couple of things here that I would tell you about. What the hell is the name of the damn? Give me a second. I'm cheating here, Amit. I'm looking something up.
Yeah, hey George, this is Amit. So
yeah, so you know, at a minimum, you know, certain things are probably part of that journey. And I would say to you that if you're trying to get into that data security piece, you're probably going to have to get like a CISSP or a CISA certification to start.
Right.
Because if you get one of those two, especially if you get the CISSP, that's going to make your case a hell of a lot more interesting to people.
Right. Now, I should clarify a little more on my question. That's why I'm speaking. Yeah, that's part of my experience. So what I'm trying to do is to, since I have not worked in the banking and finance industry, and they're expecting experience in, you know, dealing with financial aspects of banking, regulation, etc., etc. That's the part I'm looking for some training. I do have the, I mean, I'm actually applying for CISSP myself, but I have, you know, hands-on security experience already. But the domain, the finance domain, that's why I do not have it. So
yeah,
that's my question.
Yeah, it's like breaking into the healthcare space, right? It's the same general question.
Exactly. Same. Yep.
The best I can tell you, Amit, is I would be looking at small startup banks. That you know, instead of the large ones, you know, on a lot of these, I think the answer, another potential answer, is go small.
Yeah.
You know, that's the best. You know.
They may have, you know, less expectations or whatever. They could be, yeah. Okay, I'll take a look. I'm also looking to see there's some training about anti-money laundering, AML, CML, or something like that.
You know, but and again, you know, this is the old expression. I would find out what the biggest demand is first.
Right.
You know, like for example, if all of these guys are worried about cybersecurity, that's not going away anytime soon. So I would be making sure that one of the first things I was wrapping my head around was that, right? Because you know, when you start putting those narratives together, it really becomes a hell of a lot harder to walk away from it. And I'll tell you something else. I'm a big believer in this. And again, I'm gonna abstract this a little bit. If I were in a room with you and we were having a conversation about topic XYZ, I'm going to know in minutes, in fact seconds, if you have a clue as to what you're talking about. I'm going to know about your vocabulary. I'm going to know about your insights. I'm going to know if you have a story to tell. I'm going to know that in the first 2 minutes of our conversation. So one of the things I think it's obvious to me, it may not be obvious to others, is think about you're in that interview. What are they really asking for? Do they really care that you have the certificate? No. Do they really care that you have, you know, quote unquote, the experience? Well, they do, but now I can lie on my resume. I mean, anybody can lie on a resume at the end of the day. But when you're there having that conversation, you're really trying to say, wait a minute, I realize I may not have these pieces that you want, but here's that other, here's the lingo, here's the insight, here's the vision. So I may not have the particular dot this I or cross that T, but I've now been learning the lingo. I've been learning the best practices. I've been learning the application, and I can actually have a conversation with you about it. That's a hell of a lot different than saying I went out and got these certifications, and because I have these certifications, here I am. So to me, it's always about that conversation, because in that conversation, if I start hearing your vision, hey, wait a minute, this person knows what they're talking about. I can't tell you how many times I hear people that know the words, but they don't know how to put the words together.
Thanks.
Hey, George, this is David. I've got an observation as well. Amit wrote that he has a background in wireless and HR. I would also suggest you consider, and this is true for everyone trying to change industries, highlight what's transferable from the skills that you have to the industry you're getting into. So in wireless, you've got to have a secure connection point to point. And that's probably very important in banking as well. So talk about your competency in that. In HR, you need to secure data on the individual very well, because that data is protected. Talk about how you would protect data. So try and find what's transferable in your background, and maybe also you were in a regulated environment. If you were, you could talk about that, because banking and finance is regulated. So talk about what's transferable and potentially important to the new industry going in.
Thanks, David.
George, there's a question from Dara from just a few minutes ago.
I'm looking right.
939, his experiences in corporate finance.
Geez, it's been flying. 939. There's Dara. Yeah, Salesforce gets tough, right? Those bigger SaaS platforms. I'll be honest with you, Dara, I don't have a good answer on that one. Salesforce, I don't know if there's any. The only thought that pops into my head is there Salesforce meetup groups that you can start attending and interacting with. That's the best I got on that one. Because those big platforms, right? It's that becomes the challenge on that one, right? There's no, to my knowledge anyway, there's no AWS you can get a free account. Azure you can get a free account. I don't know if the same thing holds true on Salesforce or not. That's a tough question.
George, this is Jara. From what I've been reading is that Salesforce ecosystem is supposed to create 3 million jobs over the next 3 to 4 years, globally, 3 million jobs.
Oh, I don't doubt that.
And I'm currently taking a certification to become a Salesforce admin, Salesforce admin administrator, so that I can hopefully get a job setting up Salesforce for a small to medium or large company.
Well, that's where, honestly, Darry, I think that's where you start. But I would tell you, I would augment that work with find a meetup group. Because one of the things I would try and do out of that meetup group is see if you can, how do I say this? You want to find a meetup group where you can talk to some people about their experiences and their stories, so that you can at least embellish that as part of your, not only your education process, but what you might say during the interview process, if that makes sense. So in other words, not the fact that you've experienced it, but you've at least heard enough stories that you understand the, you understand the space, that you can, again, have a more in-depth intellectual conversation with them rather than an interview conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so that I can kind of talk the language and try to understand some of the issues that they might be facing, or that
Correct.
I might face in the job.
Correct.
So, and I'm not alone in terms of if people are getting certification, there's a lot of cases where we're getting the certification, but we might not necessarily have the experience, and that becomes a hindrance.
So, and honestly, Darren, not to cut you off, the other thing I would tell you to do, I'd find a contact at Salesforce and say, look, here's my deal. What would you advise me to do?
There are
Because
also Salesforce implementers, because Salesforce doesn't implement their own software. So look for those contacts as well.
yeah, I mean, honestly, Dara, I think a lot of this is going to get back to that whole networking conversation again, where, you don't, if you think about it, right, some people are like, hey, I want to network with you because I want to find a job, right? That's, one approach for networking. I think another approach really gets you to this, well, wait a minute, why am I networking with you? And, what would really be helpful for me is as I build this relationship with you, I'd really like to know more about this platform. I realize I might not be able to get hired today because I might not be there yet. But what can you give me? What can I? Give me? I want to sound so selfish, but what are structures? What are some ideas that you can give me? Because hey, you're a Salesforce salesperson, as an example, right? You're out there actually working with these companies. What are some of the opportunities or the ways I could potentially crack into those companies? So to me, that would be more of a true networking conversation than, hey, how do I find a job at Salesforce? Because they're the ones that are going to know what these issues are, right? They're going to say, there's a place XYZ you don't have a snowball's chance of getting into. Another place might say, yeah, boy, we're seeing a lot of this penetration of Salesforce into XYZ category. Start aligning your skills to be in that direction. So to me, I'd use that networking as a much more, what's the term? More investigative, more, make the conversation more insightful. And Haresh just posted something, Dara, at 9:50.
Okay, George, looks like that's wrapped up. Yeah, just on the Salesforce, I did post for all of us, for Dara. There's a company with an office in Hamilton, New Jersey. They're a national company. It's called Internet Creations. They're one of the Salesforce implementers. You might look for companies like them. And also, yeah, along the lines of Haresh's comment about Udemy has courses. Absolutely. I did post previously in the chat, I'll post it right now, the PSG of Mercer County link. We have a page that has 53 e-learning websites, all listed there, links to those websites. So if you're looking for some sort of training or certification, you might do well to find it there. So let me just post that really quick. But George, I want to say thank you so much for always being a supporter, a longtime supporter of the Breakfast Club of New Jersey. This series that you've been doing for the last 6-7 years is wonderful, and you can really see the evolution. I've been blessed to see all of them over the years, multiple times. And so folks, if you have the opportunity to go back to George's website and see some of the other ones, I think it'll be a real treat for you if you have not yet had that opportunity to do so. And if there are no other comments, maybe Frank or Jerry, if there's any parting comments as we wrap up.
I would just suggest to everyone, what was discussed as far as like going after certifications is a great first step, and it's definitely a step that I applaud those that take it. But also then go the extra mile. Look for a nonprofit out there that, in the case of the example, are running Salesforce. These companies are thirsting right now because of the economic impact of the pandemic. These not-for-profits are hanging by a thread. Volunteer your time to help them with their Salesforce activities after you get the certification. Now you differentiate yourself and you come into an interview. Not only can you talk about that you have the certification, but you can talk about the practical hands-on experience. The way it was always explained to me is if two people showed up to you and you wanted to build a house, and one said, hey, I read a book on it and I got certified, and the other one is talking about their carpentry skills, their electrical skills, you know, all of the different aspects of framing a house. Which one are you going to hire? Of course, today, with the amount of disruption, we keep saying the pace of change and the volume of change is, you know, paramount. So they don't have the time to take you on board and nurture you and get you the practical experience. They need somebody that has at least that foundational experience already. So use volunteering, use, you know, the not-for-profits as your way to get that hands-on and practical experience. You're helping out, you know, pick an organization that you believe in, you know, their mission and values and what they deliver for the community and society. And then at the same time, help yourself out by helping them out. And that's a win-win that will help you when you get to the interview stage and actually start going for a position. So that would be my additional insight to share. Back to you, Dave.
Great, great, terrific. Thanks, Frank. And some of you may not be aware, Salesforce actually has a separate division for nonprofits. So a lot of us may know salesforce.com to get information. They even have a separate link called salesforce.org. Their pricing is completely different. They actually offer it free to very small organizations. So if you can become familiar with using Salesforce in a nonprofit environment, the product is basically very similar. It's basically a different support and pricing model that they have for the nonprofit organizations. So check that out. I posted that in the chat as well. So very good. So let's see. I'm just bringing up next month's calendar because I'm sorry, I forgot who's presenting next month. But the Breakfast Club of New Jersey will be back next month with our presenters. Let me just quickly bring that up. Oh, terrific. Abby Kohut will be here. Terrific. Abby Kohut. It is Saturday the 13th. It's not unlucky. It's not Friday the 13th. February 13th, Abby Kohut, becoming a victor rather than a victim. So I'm so glad that Abby Kohut is back to being able to present. She had been very busy with other things recently, but back on being able to present to us, and she's making the rounds again. So hopefully you can join us next month. And then the following month, March 13th, just to kind of check ahead, Ken Lang will be presenting LinkedIn and networking. So you may want to check out the breakfasthub.com website, and under the About Us menu item is a speaker menu, and that has our program where got the calendar populated for the first 6 months. So you'll be happy to look through that and make sure you find presenters that you don't want to miss and you put them on your event calendar as well. All right, so once again, thank you very much, George. We are, all of us, going to keep this session open. We'll turn off the recording so we can hang around, and it'd be like hanging around the conference room at the Days Inn. Of course, we're still waiting for being able to meet in person, but this will be our virtual networking, virtual hanging out. Still a lot of us in the call. We'll keep this open for a little while longer. So hopefully you can hang around, and if not, we hope to see you all virtually very soon. Bye, everybody.